morning and welcome back to the Guyana Extractive Sector Transparency Week. Today is day 5, the last day of our conference, and we are just blessed to have all our speakers and esteemed panelists to join us throughout this entire week. And this upcoming session is no exception. We have something very exciting for you. The title is Extractivism and Intergenerational Justice in Guyana. Now, our two speakers today, Benita Davis, Project Manager of Policy Forum Guyana, and Dr. Troy Thomas, Dean of the Faculty of Natural Sciences and Director of Undergraduate Research. They prepared a very informative presentation for you that's going to focus on somewhat the Transparency Institute Guyana Inc. and Policy Forum Guyana have been working on. And they've been focused on intergenerational justice and its implementation in the extractive industries, particularly oil and gas. So this presentation will highlight various ways in which they have been advocating for intergenerational equity. This is a concept of fairness amongst generations in the use of conservation of the environment and its natural resources, so that the next generations can benefit and can be the keepers of the future. With that, I would like to give this over to Dr. Troy Thomas to start with his presentation.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am Troy Thomas, and I will present today on a case that was filed in the High Court in Guyana that focuses on a constitutional argument as it relates to petroleum activities in Guyana. The title says petroleum production, but by that I'm referring to the full set of activities, including exploration, what we might formally substantively refer to as production, and also the end use, where fossil fuels are burned to release the energy. I will first show you some basic information about the case, the date on which it was filed, May 21, 2021, so quite recently. The applicants, the first applicant being me and colleague Quada De Freitas. The attorneys at law who would have filed on our behalf are Islinda Janki and Ronald G. Birch Smith. The respondent in the case is the Attorney General, who is essentially representing the state. It's a fixed date application, proceeding for relief under the Constitution. So it's really focusing on a constitutional argument under the court's regular jurisdiction. The next thing that I'll focus on is the main issue in the case, which is Constitution, and specifically Article 149J, 1 and 2. The statement of Article 149J, the parts identified, are what you see on the screen at the moment. And it's important to read it carefully and appreciate what is provided there. It says everyone has a right to an environment that is not harmful to his or her health or well-being. 2, the state shall protect the environment for the benefit of present and future generations through reasonable legislative and other measures designed to A, prevent pollution and ecological degradation, B, promote conservation, and C, secure sustainable development and use of natural resources while promoting justifiable economic and social development. Now, this would seem to be quite clear as to what is intended and what is meant, at least in my reading of it. But there are some terms in there that might need to be defined. I will focus your attention for just a little bit on how environment might be defined, and I'll go now to the definition as it appears in the Environmental Protection Act, CAP 2005. The Act defines the environment as all land, area beneath land surface, atmosphere, climate, all water, surface water, groundwater, sea, seabed, marine and coastal areas, and natural resources or any combination or part thereof. So it's a pretty broad definition that captures just about everything that we regard as being part of the environment. And that needs to be taken into consideration whenever, in the context of a case, we refer to the environment. I will now go to there are two other articles that I would want to spotlight quickly because of their relevance to the case in general, before I move to the core issue, the main contentions. This is Article 36 of the Constitution and Article 38B. Article 36 says that the well-being of the nation depends upon preserving clean air, fertile soil, pure water, and a rich diversity of plants, animals, and ecosystems. Article 38B, and this one relates to children, and one might even, to some extent, see some links to the next generation. The best interest of the child shall be the primary consideration in all judicial proceedings and decisions, and in all matters concerning children, whether undertaken by public or private social welfare institutions, administrative authorities, or legislative bodies. And I think that one is quite important, because when we argue the kinds of things we're arguing in this case, it's not only about us in the present, it's about the children and the next generations to come. I will now move to our main contentions in the case. The main contentions, and there are two parts of it, or two subparts that I will just highlight briefly. But it's really that the petroleum production in Guyana is in contravention of Article 149J. If you recall, we looked at that just a few slides earlier. Article 149J of the Constitution, petroleum activities, whether it's exploration, production, and we must also include in that end use, because the effects of petroleum activities in Guyana are not complete when we have produced and we have shipped it, or when we move on from the company that would have done the production. It has to do with ultimate use of the energy that we want to get out of the whatever petroleum products we have. It contributes to climate change. We often refer to this as global warming. Sometimes we refer to them interchangeably. They refer to different things, but they're related. Climate change does not necessarily mean global warming, but well, in our context, it does actually. But it contributes to climate change by releasing greenhouse gases. And in the case of Guyana, it would be billions of tons if the petroleum that has been discovered would eventually be used. And so when we're talking about petroleum activities, we also have to talk about all the projections, all the developments that are to come, and not only the one or the ones that are currently being worked on. Climate change will have catastrophic consequences for humans and all life on Earth. And there is a lot of information about this, which is presented in the case. Essentially, it's an existential threat. And we use that term sometimes, and I often wonder if we really appreciate what it means, because it should spring us into action. But this existential threat is going to be more so disproportionate towards, it would impact in a more disproportionate way children and future generations, because the threat will increase as time goes on if we do not change the things that we're doing. It also contributes to ocean acidification as the ocean absorbs excess carbon dioxide, which will impact on wildlife ecosystems and ultimately also on people who depend on the ocean for their livelihoods. Ultimately then, by facilitating, if Guyana is facilitating petroleum production, it's actually contributing to and facilitating the consequences that we can see as a result of the burning of fossil fuels. And if we take cognizance of Article 149J, then my belief is that the entire endeavor is in contravention of the article. So then, what are the declarations that we're seeking as a result? There are quite a few, and what I'm presenting here is a little bit of an unsatisfactory summary of them, but hopefully I highlight some of the main issues. We're asking the court to declare that given the duty that the state has under Article 149J, that the state to refrain from authorizing activities that would contribute to climate change and ocean acidification. As identified earlier, sea level rise is mentioned here because it's also quite, it's one of the important consequences of climate change, and one that is very relevant to us given that we live on the low-lying coast. The state needs to take reasonable measures to prevent pollution of the atmosphere and the oceans from greenhouse gases. And this should include also those that come from petroleum activities. That the state should carry out independent verification of the types and the amounts of greenhouse gases emitted. If all of this, the greenhouse gases are responsible for the things that they're responsible for, and it's important for the state to preserve the environment, then the state must know all of these projects, what they will be releasing ultimately into the atmosphere. And then the state needs to take that information into consideration whenever it's approving some project or giving a license or permitting anything or any relevant project. So that's part of the declarations directed specifically to the state, but there are some others which I will focus on now briefly. And these are some declarations that are not saying, you know, this is the state responsibilities, but we're asking for them anyway. To declare that direct emissions of greenhouse gases from the LISA 1 project, which is developed, and LISA 2 and Pariah, which are proposed, would amount to violation of the Constitution. So we want a declaration to that effect. We want a declaration to the effect that increase in greenhouse gas emissions is really in contravention to the Paris Agreement to which Guyana is signatory, and we should not increase our emissions under the agreement. And hence it would also be in conflict with Article 149J. When we put all the emissions, direct and indirect, together, including those from combustion of fossil fuels, we want the court to declare that it would make the environment more harmful for health and well-being of citizens and future generations. And finally, as for this presentation, we are asking the court to declare that modifying the Environmental Protection Act, Cap 2005, with the effect of allowing activities that make the environment more harmful, is really harmful to the health and well-being of individuals, is really in violation of a state duty under Article 149J. And this is not asserting that modifications might be done deliberately for that purpose, but if some modification is done and this is in effect what it allows, then that will be in violation of the Constitution. Those are the key elements of the case. Of course, there is a lot more information in the documents filed and the evidence to support the claims made. But essentially, this is the core of the case that is now before the courts. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. And there are a couple of questions for you. So if it is okay with you, we will dive into the Q&A. Here's the first question then. Dr. Troy, where can we find a copy of the court filing? And is it like accessible? Can it be emailed to people, or is it publicly available?
Well, the court filing is really a public document, so there should be no restrictions on accessing it. It can be mailed. My colleagues and I have discussed the possibility of putting it on a website, but we haven't actioned that as yet. I don't know what in particular the court does. Perhaps it just makes it available at its location. I'm not sure. You know, we can try to disseminate it more widely, and we have discussed the possibility and utility of putting the documents up on a website, but we have not gotten around to that yet. But in the meantime, if anybody requests the documents, I can certainly email it to them.
Thank you. Is there an email address where they can maybe reach out to somebody in your office to get a copy of it? Or what's the best way to get to people?
Well, that's a good question, because it would really be to my personal mailbox, and then it made me think twice.
Yes.
about giving it out. I think though that people can contact me about it. That would be fine. I didn't put my email address on the slide presented, but it's troy.thomas@uog.edu.gy.
Yeah, we can definitely get that in the chat so people can grab it. And thank you so much for your gracious offer to disseminate this to the participants. I'm sure it will be very helpful for transparency and for better understanding what is happening. Now, the next question is, Dr. Troy, was it easy to find a local attorney willing to take your case?
Yes, and no at the same time, because Islinda Janki is, anybody who knows her will know that she's very involved with and passionate about environmental issues. So on her part, yes, it was easy. But to find others, that's where the challenge would arise. But I relied on her quite a bit, her network as a legal person, to look and see who else might be available and who else might feel that they have the expertise to deal with this case. And that's how I went about it, basically.
Thank you so much. Now, here is the next question. Dr. Thomas, are you aware if the waters near the Liza 1 FPSO are currently being studied to determine the effect of oil production on the marine life?
I can't say that I am well aware of everything that is going on. What I do know is that we have a shortage of information insofar as all of this information is not necessarily available publicly. one of the things we're asking for is, and this doesn't have to do with the water, but for the government to independently assess what gases would be emitted. And that's because the assessments that we've had, or the information on it, would have come from other sources, some of whom, like the oil companies themselves. But the country needs to do its own. So I'm not sure if there's any, if there are studies ongoing at the moment. I know there have been activism around issues like those and trying to get those things done. I'm not sure about the extent of success with it as yet.
Thank you. Thank you for the explanation. Now, here's a question that probably many people are wondering about. What's your assessment of the case likely success?
That's a good question. But given that it's before the courts at the moment, I would say, I would rely on the judgment and expertise of the court. Of course, the fact that I've advanced the case should indicate that I believe that I have a good case. But beyond that, I wouldn't want to speculate at this point because of the fact that it has been officially filed.
Thank you so much. Now, here is one more question before we move on to our next presenter. Do you believe there is a place for an oil and gas industry in Guyana?
That's also quite a good question, and I don't know if I have the expertise to decide. What I would say, the thing that really interests me in this regard is preservation of the environment. I'm aware that it might be possible to, based on the Constitution as well, justify certain economic development. But I think while you're doing that, you still have to make the case about preservation of the environment. So there will at least need to be something that you're doing to rectify whatever damage the development might do if it's not addressed at all.
Thank you so much. And there is one more question, if you're still willing to answer one more question here with us. How will you get technical data to show acidification of the ocean and direct harm to the environment?
So there are many studies that would have been done on this. For example, it would be the same for data on global warming. I wouldn't ask Guyana at this point to produce data on it, but we can rely on studies that have been done across the world and what scientists have come to conclude about these activities and what they do. So even in the absence of, and think about it this way, even if we were to do a study now, what we will find is the current state of affairs. We won't be able to prove, if that's what a person is getting at, that acidification occurred over time. You will need time to pass in order for you to do that. So whenever we, unless we want to get to a point where we have had the consequences and we want to argue retroactively, but then we're not being proactive to address the problem, we're trying to be reactive. So at this point, we'll need to go on the scientific evidence of what these kinds of activities lead to. And we can look at what is going on in Guyana. For example, we know that there has been flaring. So if we're talking about release of gases, we know that gases will be released, and we can now rely on the understood and already compiled scientific evidence about the impacts that will have. And that's what I would say as it relates to the case now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. Now, it has your presentation and your answers have resulted in many questions. So let me just squeeze in one more question before we move on. It is regarding the Constitution. According to the Constitution 1980, Article 36, states that the state will protect and make rational use of its land, mineral, water, resources, etc. how are you getting around the concept or argument of rational use in your court case?
Well, rational use, and I am not attempting to be the attorney. I'm just going to answer this as a layman. Rational use is not in conflict or immediately in conflict or clearly in conflict with the mandate to preserve the environment. That rationality that goes into it could be, how do we continue to preserve the environment while we do this?
Thank you so much. And let me just express my gratitude for you sharing your experience, your expertise, your knowledge, your passion for the topic. It's been wonderful to have you here as a conversation partner. And right now, I'd like to give the word over to Miss Benita Davis, who will talk about the intergenerational side of the question.
Thank you, Kitty. Good day, everyone. So I'm Benita Davis, and I'm here this morning to highlight Policy Forum Guyana's work as it relates to extractivism and intergenerational justice. But before I start, the image you're seeing is actually a section of a recently completed mural in the heart of Georgetown. And I decided to share this image because it should remind us all that unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, then nothing is going to get better in terms of Guyana's extractive industry. The following slide gives a brief background into Policy Forum Guyana. So Policy Forum Guyana, PFG, is a non-governmental organization with no political affiliation that focuses primarily on accountability and transparency issues related to natural resources, climate change, and the extractive industries. To date, PFG has led the following civic initiatives, such as issued press releases on the gold and oil and gas sectors, which has bolstered government, international organizations, private sector, and civil society groups into action. While the next slide highlights that Policy Forum Guyana was able to create Guyana's intended nationally determined contributions to United Nations COP21 on climate change in November 2015. This is seen on the following slide. Yes, here you have the booklet that includes the national intended determined contributions, which were developed in 2015 for the conference to reduce global warming. Next, Policy Forum Guyana was able to assist the government by organizing the selection process for Guyana Extractive Industry and Transparency Initiative Board. After this, we were even able to conduct grassroots discussions in administrative regions 2, 4, 6, and 10 on how oil and gas should be used to create a better future for Guyanese. And if you notice in this slide, we have a snippet of the Guyana Times article highlighting the open space conducted in Essequibo, specifically in Guyana. And this was in collaboration with Transparency Institute Guyana, Inc. And the picture on the right is in Georgetown, Guyana, Marian Academy, which is also in collaboration with TIGI. Next, we produced, coming out of the discussions, the grassroots discussions, we were able to produce an oil and gas booklet entitled Becoming an Oil Producer, The Future We Haven't Discussed. And if you're interested in a copy of this booklet, please do not hesitate to contact us. Up next are the efforts we made during the start of the pandemic to protect our life-giving resource, water. So Policy Forum Guyana, in collaboration with WWF Guyanas and IUCN Netherlands, had a social media campaign about fresh water protection titled Healthy Rivers, Healthy People, highlighting the negative impacts of the gold mining industry on human health and aquatic life. We then, more recently, were able to create an advocacy training toolkit, and this is shown on the following slide, Living in Harmony with Nature and Society. So all publications shown in this PowerPoint can be readily downloaded off our website, that is policyforumgy@gmail.com. And if you look closely at this image, you see that the toolkit includes several booklets as well as a flash drive, and that flash drive has videos and audio materials and even games and PowerPoint presentations that are suited or better able for children, so youth organizations can easily use it in terms of advocating for freshwater protection and the overall unity within nature and society. Next, due to the work PFG was doing in relation to the oil and gas sector, we were able to partner with Goa Foundation, India, and the Future We Need to have a representative of the organization visit Guyana and lobby for intergenerational justice and its implementation in the extractive industries. So here we have Mr. Rahul Basu, the Goa Foundation rep, having a public lecture on the principles of mineral extraction, which we'll learn a bit more later on. And I'm happy to say that Mr. Basu is also a part of this call. So if you have any questions related to these principles, which will be highlighted, you can direct it to him, or he will be able to intervene to further explain it. Next, since the visit, PFG has been focused on ensuring this transformation of Guyana through oil and gas results in a more sustainable society grounded in the concept of intergenerational justice. So here's a YouTube video by Tata Pravish.
Hi, come on in, have a seat. So good morning, everyone. When's the last time any of you drew a picture?
Past 5.
Today, we're here to draw a picture. So what you'll see here are some crayons, colors in each box. Choose your colors wisely because there will be another group coming in after you and making another picture with what you leave behind. So here we have the other group.
Everybody say hi.
Why don't we show the kids the pictures that we've drawn?
Yeah, sure. Bye.
So nice.
Wow. Yes.
Why don't you show them what you drew?
It's all black. We all took away the bright colors.
I wish I wasn't this selfish, taking away all the bright colors.
Maybe we could have broken the colors and left half of them for them and for the next group.
I do hope that we all now have a clearer understanding of intergenerational justice. I therefore would like to use this opportunity as Transparency Week comes to an end to launch the first part of PFG's Intergenerational Justice and Extractivism video series entitled Natural Resources Are Not Commodities.
Our ancestors, in their wisdom, recognized the interconnectivity of life. They passed to us a communal tradition that includes responsibility for the natural world on which we all depend. Individuals did not see themselves living in isolation, detached from the community. Rather, the connection to the land
animals, and environment were a seamless whole. From ancient times, it was clearly understood that people had free access to the water in the rivers, the fresh air, the forests, and the resources. It was more about having access to and not the ownership of these things. So I ask you, does anyone own natural resources? Ancient tradition holds that these inherited natural assets should be handed down to the next generation with their value intact and to be enjoyed in the same degree that the current generation enjoys them. If we do not seriously consider the importance of the next generation, everyone will consume their inheritance now, leaving the next generation poorer. Unfortunately, governments around the world do not understand minerals as a shared inheritance. The discovery of gold or oil are treated as windfall profits. What is this concept? This is a concept which evokes images of something ownerless, unpredictable, and to be seized on like winnings from a lottery. Again, like people who win the lottery, politicians happily spend money on entertainment and distractions without a thought to losses to future generations. Governments, even in developed countries, suffer enormous losses. Australia, for example, lost 82% of the value of all its minerals between 2000 to 2010. For every $100 it sold, the owners, Australia, received $18. The story of the North Sea oil is a similar story for the UK. Guyana has lost billions of dollars in the same manner in the sale of gold. Royalty payments on gold produced is a fraction of its value, to say nothing of the estimated 50% of gold production which is smuggled out of the country without any payment at all. So I ask you again, does anyone own natural resources? Even if you still cannot answer that question, we need to remember, in order to shape a country that will benefit Guyanese now and into the future, we need a new political story, one that replaces this divisiveness, a political story that supports what humans do best, that is, to find common ground in confronting our predicaments and to unite to overcome them.
I trust that we no longer view natural resources as ownerless, because the reality is that it belongs to the people of Guyana, and the government simply acts as a trustee. On that note, I now present to you the second video in this series, which highlights 5 principles of ensuring intergenerational justice.
We, the people of Guyana, must ensure that our children and our future generations will be at least as well provided for as we are. This is called intergenerational fairness. The way in which our natural resources are governed help us to achieve this fairness. But it is to be set out by a framework of principles. Allow me to explain one such framework, which includes 5 central principles. Principle 1. This is known as the public trust doctrine, which states that all minerals are inherited wealth, highlighting that we, the people of Guyana, own these minerals. This principle covers all natural resources on the land, including subsoil and sub-ocean. Therefore, the government is merely acting as a trustee of these minerals on our behalf. Principle 2. This principle relates to intergenerational equity and states that all Guyanese includes our future generations. We, present generation, are simply custodians of these assets which have been handed down to us from our foreparents, and it is our responsibility to ensure we pass them on to future generations. Principle 3. It is known as the principle of zero loss of value. This simply means that the full value of the assets must be passed on to the next generation. If you sell your mineral resources, as Guyanese, we must ensure zero loss, which means we must capture the full economic value of our resources. Once this revenue is spent, Society has nothing to pass on to the next generation, neither the assets themselves nor the income they generated. Any loss is a loss to all Guyanese and to our future generations. Principle 4. All income from the sale of assets must be saved in a permanent fund. Entire proceeds must be launched in a special fund. That is the Sovereign Wealth Fund for the benefit of future generations. We need to consider the impact on the natural environment when we make decisions to buy or to sell assets such as gold and oil. We also consider how quickly we are using up these minerals. Moderately, we can ensure that the impacts are not excessive and mineral resources remain available to future generations. Finally, Principle 5. Share all, a citizen's dividend. Even though all of the proceeds derived from the sale of minerals, meaning the substance of the fund, belong to the next generation as stated before, the income generated by investing these funds belong to this generation and should be divided equally to all citizens as a citizen's dividend. The advantages of this approach are: all citizens have a direct interest in monitoring the use of the funds. It rectifies historical injustice to the poor. It protects the environment from which the minerals are extracted. Government can generate revenue by taxing this income. It encourages the possibility of corrupt access to funds by politicians. It protects the fund indefinitely, long after the oil and gold have been exhausted. These 5 principles are first and foremost constitutional. Additionally, they conform to mainstream economics, encourages inheritance customs, support Guyana's environmental goals, and the shares from these assets motivates Guyanese to protect their resources.
This brings me to the end of my presentation, and I would like to thank you all for your attention. If you have any questions or comments, Mr. McCormack and I will do our best to answer you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Davis. It was very informative. I loved the videos. I'm sure that many of our participants agree that they were enlightening, they were interesting, and very informative. Now we do have a question, and I encourage our participants to add their questions in the Q&A where we have them lined up. And here is the first question. Benita, have you ever heard of the Policy Forum Guyana? Well, we have never heard of the Policy Forum Guyana, although they seem to have done good work. Does PFG want a renegotiation of the oil contract?
Thank you. So Policy Forum Guyana has been around since 2015, and we're a small organization and we fall under Guyana Human Rights Association, and it's actually a network of several civic organizations, about 21, that includes indigenous organizations, youth organizations, and even trade unions. So I hope you're able to check out our website or maybe our Facebook page and become a bit more afraid with some of the work that we've been up to. In terms of renegotiating the contract, I may pass that question on to Mr. McCormack, and maybe he can give a more substantial answer.
Well, before we do that, there is another part to this question. Maybe you can answer that, and then we can ask Mr. McCormack. So the question is, how are you funded?
So PFG has been funded in the past by organizations like WWF Guyana's, IUCN Netherlands, and more recently, Open Society Foundation. So we literally just apply for grants and hope we get through and are able to do the work that we've been doing over the past few years.
Thank you so much. And Mr. McCormack, would you like to comment on the previous question?
The short answer would be that we are not gotten involved with the contract. Despite them, we agree with that many shortcomings of it need to be addressed. Our focus is on people understanding what the nature of the assets are. We don't think of oil and gas as inherited assets. We are encouraged to believe they're windfall profits as if we'd won a lottery and can be spent in any way at all. And what we are trying to do is help Guyanese understand that they're not, it's not like buying and selling a watch or a car, that if once your assets are sold, they're sold permanently. There's no coming back. And if you spend the income you earn from assets that were inherited, the future generations will receive neither the assets nor the benefits of what they were sold for. That's the standard procedure. This year, the oil company is anticipated to generate about 1.9 billion US dollars in oil sales. When you look at the income of that 1.9 billion to the government of Guyana, it amounts in terms of royalties and profits to about 18 or 19%. It's $285 million. So there's a huge loss in the way that we sell assets, and the benefit even of that 18 or 19% is not passed on to the next generation. It tends to be used instead of taxation. We spend this money. So I don't know if that's helpful as to what our orientation is as opposed to the contract.
Thank you so much, Mr. McCormack. Now here is the next question. What type of work have you been doing with Amerindian communities? Ms. Benita, do you want to take this question?
Sure, no problem. So to date, we have been advocating for the protection of their rivers, because we know it is generally in mining areas, and that was with WWF Guyana's and IUCN Netherlands. We noticed that a lot of indigenous communities depend heavily on their freshwater resources and the fishes and the entire aquatic life. And so we decided over the past few years that we'll focus on ensuring river protection. So we conducted an assessment. We even went as far as to work along with indigenous communities to ensure the restoration or the reforestation of mined out, well, that's gold mining sites. And currently we're created advocacy toolkits, trained indigenous youths on how to assess their water quality of these rivers and wells, as well as provided them with the expertise to advocate on their own, because we train them on how to use videos and to create short videos on how the gold mining industry have impacted their lives, which is also streamed on our YouTube pages and Facebook sites and the website. And now we're looking to have what you call zones of sacrifices. And this is also in collaboration with WWF. And so we hope that indigenous communities who are affected in some, well, their water resources are impacted in some way, can do a short testimonial video highlighting how this has hindered their life. And so that's the upcoming, maybe for June, July, and the rest of the year, we'll be focusing on that. So thank you very much.
Oh, this is great to know. Thank you so much, Ms. Davis. Now here is the next question. Will you be working on addressing mercury issues, which appear as key issues?
Yes, so mercury is the main thing that we focus on, apart from river mining and the turbidity issues caused by the actual physical activity of mining activities. Our main goal is mercury and the reduction and then subsequent removal of mercury as according to the Minamata Convention. So we are also actually working on the ASGM NAP document that ensures the phase out of mercury by 2030. So we're creating the national action plan for that. And I personally am involved in that process.
That's great to know. Thank you so much. There are some other questions coming in. Let me field you the next one. Please explain the calculations for arriving at the 18 to 19% figure for government take.
I guess Mike can answer that.
Mr. McCormack, can we solicit you for this answer?
You can, yes. I'm just looking for where I actually had the thing written down. The basic argument is that the overall sales of oil for this year from Liza Phase 1 was estimated at $1.9 billion if oil was sold at $45 a barrel, and for 43.8 million barrels of oil at that price would produce $1.9 billion. The same calculations, these were in the press about a week ago. I can't vouch for the accuracy of the particular figures. I'm giving you figures that were published as a basis for making a quite different argument from the one I'm making, by the way. And the total value to the government in terms of what the government receives from this is calculated in terms of royalties and a percentage of profit. Royalties are in fact the price at which you're selling oil. We should call it that because that's what it is. And so the government's received a combination of from profits and royalties of $285 million dollars. And that is about 19% of 1.9 billion. And so in terms of the original value of the oil compared to the government's, not the government and therefore like the people of Guyana benefit from, is 19% of the overall value of the oil. I don't know if that's helpful.
Thank you so much for the explanation, Mr. McCormack. And it seems to be a follow-up question to you. And here it is, follow-up. Will the government take increase once CAPEX costs are paid off?
Does the government, sorry, do that again?
Will the government take increase once CAPEX costs are paid off?
I'm not sure what CAPEX costs are, but if they refer to the amount of the sales of oil that go to offsetting the investment costs of the companies, once those are covered in the first few years, the calculation is then the government's take would be more attractive and the percentage the government gets would increase. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to or if that's helpful.
Well, thank you so much. If that participant has an explanation to the CAPEX cost, I can certainly read that off to our speakers. And the floor is open and we are still taking questions. And there's another participant who is interested to know the responses from citizens in regards to your outreach and communications.
So in terms of the open space activities that started around 2018 in the different regions on oil and gas, we had an excess of 100 participants in Islinda Janki, maybe over 70 in Georgetown. We actually had 2 meetings in Georgetown to facilitate the huge interest in such an event, because it was the first time that persons were being asked, well, grassroots individuals were being asked on what they feel oil and gas resources can be used to benefit them, because generally the discussions were at a higher level and they didn't feel that they could have participated or been involved. So by coming down to their level and having these persons, whether you're working in the market or wherever you are, maybe just a housewife come in and then state that, okay, well, Guyana is receiving this money and this is what I would like to see it do, maybe to education, healthcare, improve infrastructure, even road development. So yes, it was welcomed by all, and we were actually planning to have one last year in Region 6, that's New Amsterdam, but because of the pandemic, we're now trying, myself and Mike actually are trying to figure out how to do it virtually. And we're looking at the idea of a citizens' assembly going forward, and not so much an open space activity.
Thank you so much, Ms. Davis. And as a follow-up to that, what kind of things do citizens want outside of jobs?
Well, yes, like I mentioned, they're interested in improved education system, maybe free healthcare, access to, for example, they mentioned that if they have a certain surgery, it's either they have to go privately or maybe out of the country to get it done. Even the president of Guyana at one time had to go out of the country to get surgeries done, and they would like the healthcare system to improve to a level that they can access these services for free. Other youths and participants were interested in free University of Guyana, having the university free, while other participants wanted better infrastructure and road systems. Like they highlighted the issues with just having one main access road. And so they said that oil and gas revenues could be used to make another road. So in case of any emergencies or to delay the traffic buildup in the rush hour sections of the day. So those were the main concerns of the citizens.
Oh, that's really good to know. Thank you so much, Ms. Davis. And there is another question about collaboration. Is PFG open to collaboration with other groups? What kind of other groups are you collaborating with?
Yes, PFG. Well, PFG's premise is on collaboration. It's like I said earlier, it's a network of several organizations. So we're focused right now. We have collaborated with the University of Guyana recently and with Green Heritage Fund in Suriname for World Oceans Day. We collaborate with persons who have a similar interest with us, or maybe an environmental position, or anything related to transparency and accountability as it relates to climate change, natural resource management, and extractive industries. So yes, we're definitely open to any collaborations once we share the similar goals. So feel free to reach out to us either by email or maybe the website.
Thank you so much. Now there is a clarification about that acronym that was earlier used. So it's capital costs for establishing the production facilities. So Mr. McCormack, just a clarification on that point. So that was the acronym. So we got that. And with that, we are actually at the end of the time that we had for today's presentation. So let me just say thank you for our two established and esteemed presenters, Ms. Benita Davis and Dr. Troy Thomas, for enlightening us, for answering all kinds of questions we threw at them, and for engaging us in this very important topic of intergenerational justice in Guyana and how it relates to extractivism. So thank you so much for our participants for attending and for the great questions that you had for us. And thank you for our presenters. And with that, we are actually going to start our closing ceremony just in a brief minute. So please stay online. We are going to take a quick technical break, and in just a minute, we will continue with our closing ceremony of the Guyana Extractive Sector Transparency Week.